Elite pilots performing extreme stunts. 50,000 fans witnessed some of the most breathtaking displays in aviation. But as storm clouds engulf the airfield, one routine goes horribly wrong. In just 3 seconds, a plane slams into a packed crowd area, becoming the deadliest airshow disaster in Belgian history. While panicked spectators sprint to safety, responders struggle to cope with the growing casualties. Amid the chaos stands one question: how had one of the most accomplished pilots lose control so catastrophically? Was this accident inevitable? Or could this all have been avoided? On July 26, 1997, thousands of spectators had gathered for the opening day of the Ostend Airshow. The event drew aerobatics teams from around the world, and for the pilots taking part, it was a chance to push their machinery to the limit and stand out among the very best. One of the headline attractions was Captain Omar Bilal. In the years leading up to Ostend, he'd won several competitions with the Royal Jordanian Falcons, helping to establish the team as a leading display act. At just 28, he was now the team's leader and widely regarded as one of the most skilled pilots on the international aerobatics circuit. While audiences looked forward to another one of his daring displays, a storm was approaching Ostend. Forecasters warned strong winds would arrive later that afternoon, just as Bilal was due to compete in the Mission Impossible trophy. As the last of 4 pilots to perform, it meant the captain would be flying in the worst weather of the day. Nevertheless, with clear skies for the time being, the airshow continued as planned. Throughout the afternoon, spectators were treated to dazzling displays of some of the most prestigious aerobatic groups. But as the Russian and Turkish teams roared across the airfield, the first sights of the approaching storm began to appear. At first, it was just light rain and a steady breeze whistling across the airfield. But by the time Captain Bilal began preparing for his routine, conditions were considerably worse. Dark clouds had rolled over Ostend, reducing visibility and making it harder to judge distance and altitude. Meanwhile, the wind was so severe that the gusts were strong enough to break spectators' umbrellas. As heavy rain swept across the airfield, a growing number of spectators abandoned the exposed viewing areas in search of shelter. Many gravitated toward a Red Cross first aid tent, located a short distance behind the crowd line, where they huddled together while waiting for the Falcons' display. Among them was a young family sheltering from the storm while their 4-year-old daughter received treatment for a minor cut. Despite the deteriorating weather, Captain Bilal takes to the skies and immediately executes an ambitious routine. For several minutes, he guides his aircraft through a series of aggressive rolls and vertical flips, drawing cheers from the crowd below. Each pass sweeps his lightweight plane low across the airfield, bringing it uncomfortably close to spectators gathered along the crowd line. Shortly after, he lines up for the centerpiece of his display. Bilal enters a horizontal spin, rotating the aircraft 7 times before pitching up into a sharp loop. At first, the maneuver appears flawless, but as the captain descends, spectators notice something isn't right. His plane seems to hesitate in the air before rapidly falling towards the ground. For a moment, it looks like he might recover. With seconds to spare, he manages to level out a few meters above the ground. But it's too late. His plane slams into the tarmac just behind the main spectator area. It immediately explodes on impact. Instead of stopping where it struck the ground, the shallow crash angle sends the wreckage hurtling forward. A fireball of burning fuel and metal skids across the airfield, crashing directly into the crowded Red Cross tent. The collision launched several people into the air, including families who had been receiving first aid inside the tent. Others were drenched in a carpet of flame. A nearby soft drink vendor, Mick Lefevre, watched in disbelief as the scene unfolded. As he ran towards the wreckage, he came across the remains of a 4-year-old girl lying among the debris. Seconds after covering her body, a victim dragged themselves from the impact zone, desperately pleading for help. There was nothing he could do, and the man died moments later. Similar scenes were unfolding all around him. Survivors staggered through the smoke with severe burns, while parents who had been inside the tent desperately searching for missing children. Among them was a mother looking for her daughter. A Red Cross volunteer later described the encounter.
Although I knew that colleagues and friends had died, I immediately switched gears. Several injured people came to ask for help. I had to stick to my task. I remember the mother of a 4-year-old girl coming up to me. She said that her husband had passed away and that she was looking for her little daughter. I wasn't allowed to tell her that her daughter had died. That was incredibly hard.
Others were frozen in place, unable to process what was happening. With dozens of victims scattered across the airfield, paramedics rushed toward the crash site. While they tried to gain access, thousands of panic-stricken spectators were attempting to leave. The confusion delayed ambulances and made it almost impossible to set up a temporary triage area. At the same time, firefighters stationed at the airfield were already searching for survivors as they battled the blaze. They pulled people from the wreckage and placed them in their station, which became an improvised treatment center. The building was quickly overwhelmed with injured victims. More than 60 people lay screaming in agony as firefighters scrambled to provide aid and bring water to treat burns. Fortunately, an off-duty doctor stepped in and helped prioritize who needed the most urgent help while they waited for paramedics. When ambulances finally arrived, another problem emerged. As authorities tried to coordinate the rescue effort, spectators were trying to contact loved ones. The sudden surge in phone calls completely overwhelmed the region's telephone network. Before long, responders found themselves unable to communicate. The Belgian Minister of the Interior was one of those who tried to control the situation. He later recalled,
"We found ourselves in an almost medieval situation. We had to write notes and deliver them on police motorcycles. I still remember when I arrived at the airport. A father was standing at the entrance. He looked at me and said, 'He's dead, isn't he? My son is dead, but you don't want to say it.' I really didn't know anything yet, and I said so."
With information being sent by handwritten notes, coordinating the rescue effort became increasingly difficult. Those in critical condition were taken to a nearby military hospital, while others were transported to local facilities. However, it became apparent that they wouldn't be able to cope with the volume of casualties. The situation was particularly challenging for those requiring specialist care, many of whom were suffering from burns. As hospitals filled up, a fleet of ambulances and military helicopters took them to facilities across Belgium, with some even being taken to Brussels, over 70 miles away. By the following day, officials feared the death toll could exceed 100. While relatives traveled between hospitals searching for loved ones, authorities were still struggling to account for the missing. Several victims had been burned beyond recognition, making identification a slow and painful process. As authorities worked to account for the missing, attention also turned toward a different question. Why had one of the world's most capable aerobatic pilots crashed in front of 50,000 spectators? Officials immediately launched an investigation and canceled all upcoming air shows at military airfields. Their initial concern was that the venue had breached safety regulations. However, when speaking to the media, the mayor stated that, as far as authorities could tell, all rules had been followed. He also offered a straightforward explanation of the crash. While the immediate cause appeared straightforward, investigators still needed to determine why Bilal lost control. In the following days, several witnesses claimed they saw Bilal's plane drift unexpectedly during his routine. This included a police officer assisting with the rescue effort, who believed a sudden gust affected its course moments before impact. Given the theory, investigators turned their focus to the aircraft itself. The Jordanian Falcons flew Walter Extra 300s at Ostend, a plane designed for extreme agility during stunts. While its lightweight design did make it more susceptible to gusts, they found no evidence that Bilal's plane had suffered a mechanical failure. They also added that the captain had completed several complex maneuvers in the same conditions leading up to the crash. As a result, investigators concluded that the weather may have influenced the aircraft's final point of impact, but it couldn't fully explain the loss of control. Needing to dig deeper, authorities scrutinized Bilal's decisions inside the cockpit. Spectators reported that the captain flew dangerously low to the ground during his display. While this may have been due to low cloud cover, it alarmed members of the public who realized they were directly in the firing line if something went wrong. Given the storm, experts commented that an experienced pilot may have adopted a more cautious approach. But Bilal chose to execute one of the most technically demanding stunts in aerobatics. Known as a rolling pull, the move required constant control inputs to keep the aircraft on its intended flight path. Even in ideal weather, it left Bilal little margin for error. With unpredictable gusts affecting the plane, his odds of losing control were greatly increased. Another issue was where the captain flew. A leading British aerobatics pilot who witnessed the display gave a damning assessment of his positioning over the airfield.
There is no question that it was deeply over the crowd, which is an absolute no-no. The display lines displaced from the crowd line are designed to prevent that from happening. This was an experienced man and he was way offline. I do not know why.
We'll likely never know why Bilal chose to fly so aggressively, but if a sudden gust had altered its path, the implications were unsettling. Although the gust may have driven him directly into the Red Cross tent, he crashed less than 100 feet from commercial aircraft and tankers carrying fuel. The same winds could have just as easily pushed him toward thousands of crowd members lining the airfield, making his lapse in judgment even more jarring. The combination of factors painted an alarming picture for investigators. They ultimately concluded that pilot error had caused the crash, but determining who would be held liable proved far more complicated. The legal battle that followed took years to reach a conclusion. For the families of the victims, the delay was the worst possible outcome. Beyond their grief, many were caring for relatives with life-changing injuries. Others faced severe trauma. The burden placed significant strain on relationships and households, leaving some in financial hardship. Mick Lefevre, the vendor stationed near the Red Cross tent, was one of those who struggled in the aftermath of the disaster. While survivors and bereaved relatives sought closure, prosecutors encountered problems of their own. Although the Falcons operated as a national aerobatics team, they weren't recognized as a legal entity under Jordanian law. In other words, they couldn't be sued or prosecuted. They also couldn't pursue Captain Bilal as he'd been killed in the crash. With both out of reach, the court's attention shifted toward the Belgian organizers who hosted the event. Both the flight director and the safety coordinator were scrutinized, with the judge eventually clearing them in 2003. It would take several more years before a second trial ruled the Flemish region of Belgium, Ostend Airport, and 3 private insurance companies liable for the damages. Together, they were ordered to pay €700,000 to victims and relatives of the deceased, less than €9,000 each. Although the legal proceedings were over, the disaster never truly left Ostend. For survivors like Mick, daily life remained a struggle, and the psychological scars contributed to the breakdown of his marriage. Despite requests to relaunch the show, 1997 marked the final Airshow held in Ostend. Instead, survivors, relatives, and emergency responders gather each year to remember those who were lost. The tragedy injured more than 70 people and claimed the lives of 10 others. The youngest victim was just 22 months old. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.